everyone. My name is Adam Williams, and you are either listening or perhaps watching to another episode of Retail Redeveloped. Now, today is a special start to a little bit of a different short-form podcast that we're doing. I'm being joined by Clayton Seeley. You guys probably know him better as CLT Development. He's got a fervent following online, and frankly, I follow him. You should follow him if you care at all about what's going on in Charlotte. Clayton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, man. How are you doing today?
Hey, can't complain. So here's what I thought we would do, Clayton. I'm going to hit you with some off-the-cuff topics, right? We're going to keep this quick. We're going to keep it down to a minute or so. I want to hear your kind of hot take on what's going on in Charlotte. So without further ado, I'm going to get it started. Cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
What changes are we going to see post-COVID when it comes to development? That's what everybody in the architecture world, that's what everybody in the development world is trying to figure out. Give me some hot takes on what you think is going to come across as being post-COVID development newness. Newness is not a word. We're going to pretend it is.
Well, I think the Camp Northends of the world are going to be the future, especially of like office.
Talk to me about why. Why is that? Unpack that.
Well, I mean, to start with, you have let's look at Camp North End from like a macro perspective. You know, you have large open floor plans, minimal entrances, minimal points of contact. You have no elevators, and you just have open and adaptable space. I think skyscrapers are not a thing of the past necessarily, but we're going to see a whole different kind of development on an office perspective. I think that residential is still going to continue how it is with multifamily in Charlotte. You'll see a massive continuation in that realm. I think hotel might be dead for at least 2 or 3 more years. That's probably the most affected part of this. I think office is still more or less chugging along. There's a couple of projects in the pipeline. I know Spectrum just started on the next phase of Vantage. But there is still a few buildings that are empty. I think Square at South End has 1 tenant. I think that 2151 Hawkins by Portman has no tenants. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses.
So let's unpack what you're saying real quick. Mm-hmm. Because Camp North End is cool as hell. Like Camp North End is so interesting. The ATCO guys, the Shorenstein guys, they told me exactly what they were going to do, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, sounds good. Good luck. And now you drive it, and it's exactly what they said it was going to be. The artwork is bananas. The landscaping is awesome. The way they've used old artifacts is awesome. Like there's a there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like that, and that's not very common. Yeah, it's got a sense of place in a really good way. But here's the problem, bro. There aren't a lot of Camp North Ends just laying there wanting to be redeveloped. Mm-hmm. And I think that if that is, quote, the future, then unfortunately, if Charlotte continues anywhere close on its current trajectory, we're talking about a future that includes a shit ton of sprawl. Mm-hmm. Because if residential like de-densifies, office de-densifies, and we continue to add more humans into the equation, we turn into Atlanta real quick.
Yes.
So while I think it's very sexy to be, COVID resistant office right now and no elevators, to your point, give people some space, all that sounds good, but let's look at the flip side, which is how is that sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you look at Camp North End, the ultimate goal isn't just building out those warehouses. They have multifamily that's coming in. They're planning 200 units at the end of one of the buildings that they're working on. They're going to, take one building, reduce it to a third, build a parking deck, and then build, mid-rise residential. And then the rest of the out parcels are actually built out. But you can be a little bit more picky with how you develop things. If people really are going to be COVID conscious, social distance conscious in the future, you can plan for that. You can provide better ventilation, which Camp North End is doing, Square at South End is doing, Vantage is doing. You can plug in more outdoor spaces. Vantage went in for Lending Tree, and places where there weren't going to be outdoor spaces, they plugged in. All they had to do was take out the window, bump out the firewall, and bam, you have an outdoor space. So I think these developments are just going to be more purposeful with how they actually interact. You're going to have to take a whole lot more into account, but it's still going to be less dense from a person per square foot perspective. It might not be less dense from a high-rise perspective. I just think that people are, like I said, are just going to be way more purposeful. And that's what you see at Camp North End. That's what you see with Lower Tuck, I think it's called. I mean, there's still all these really small warehouse districts around Charlotte that could actually grow into something as long as we do more to interact with it. We tie them together more cohesively. That's one of the bigger problems in Charlotte is cohesion between developments. And I'm hoping that you can see more of that, especially as future developments are kind of brought together, because there's a real dearth of open space in our neighborhoods, and we need to be able to plug in open space, plug in activity nodes, and then plug in places to live, work, play.
Totally agree. And I think Vantage, not to keep picking on Spectrum and Invesco, but I think you taking a development that is a full super block and thinking that in the most dense new area in probably 2 or 3 states, right? They're going to be left with more green space than when they started. That's an insane thing. They're going to have a 1 acre urban park in between those 3 buildings, which is fascinating.
And I think Clayton, that's something that's going to kind of progress. I mean, you look at Ally and their 25,000 square foot public area. I mean, you look at Legacy Union, and hopefully once everything is built out around it, they'll start to program that and integrate that better in the community. And then you look at Square at South End, that's going to have a Wilmore Centennial Park. I think you're going to have people be way more purposeful about how they create. And I used to be on this trip where I didn't really understand why we gave people public space in front of big buildings, because that's not something that exists in New York City. But in New York City, you have all these parks. Here, like South End, you don't really have a park until Wilmore Centennial opens. So it kind of becomes, the responsibility of the private industry to put that together, because that's the kind of things that make people happy.
Totally agree. I think that was a really, really thorough rundown. Clayton, I really appreciate you spending some time talking with me about just what the future looks like in development.